Your legacy is preserved in the amber glow of the choices you make today, waiting to be revealed in the future. Explore the powerful narratives of fate and the lessons that define who we are destined to become. Click subscribe now and build your own eternal cinematic legacy today. The lights along Providence Road were still strung with white bulbs from the Neighborhood Association's Autumn Festival, blinking softly against the October dark as I pulled into the cul-de-sac. I was 23 minutes late. Not dramatically late. Not the kind of late that derails an evening, just enough to feel the small guilt of a father who should have left the house sooner. I'd stopped at the frame shop on South Boulevard to pick up the piece I'd commissioned 3 weeks earlier, a photograph of Carol, standing in the doorway of our first home in 1987, her hair caught mid-laugh by the camera, one hand resting on the doorframe like she was welcoming the whole world inside. I'd had it matted in cream and framed in oak, the same wood they'd used for the mantel in my son's new house. It seemed right, a blessing from his mother for their new beginning, even though she'd been gone 2 years and couldn't deliver it herself. I parked behind a row of cars I didn't recognize and sat for a moment with the wrapped frame on the passenger seat. Through the front window, the party was already moving. Warm light, silhouettes, glasses raised. I could hear laughter from the driveway, the specific quality of a room full of people who'd already had 2 drinks and were feeling generous about everything. I gathered the frame, my keys, and the bottle of Bordeaux I'd brought as a separate gift, and walked up the front path. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. This was a housewarming, an open house, people coming and going. I turned the handle quietly, not wanting to interrupt whatever was happening, intending to slip in and find my son before announcing myself. I'd done the same thing 100 times at our own house. When Carol was entertaining, just ease through the door, get oriented, then step into the room. Some habits outlast the circumstances that created them. I stepped into the foyer. My daughter-in-law was standing at the center of the living room, wine glass raised, facing the group of 12 or so guests arranged on the new furniture I had helped them select and helped them pay for. Her voice carried the bright theatrical projection of someone making a toast. To this beautiful home, she said, and to finally being free of obligation. Laughter from the guests. Because I'll tell you something, she continued, tilting her glass toward the ceiling with a wide smile. Raymond can write his checks from across town and keep his opinions there too. This is our house, our life, and the old man can stay in his lane. More laughter. Louder this time. I looked at my son. He was seated at the end of the sectional, leaning back, one arm draped over the cushion, a grin spreading across his face. He raised his glass. Amen to that, he said. Best investment he ever made, and he doesn't even know it. The room dissolved into the easy sound of people who feel safe. I stood in the foyer for what must have been 4 or 5 seconds, long enough for the scene to sharpen from impression into fact, long enough for the framed photograph of Carol to become suddenly very heavy in my hands. Then I stepped back through the door, pulled it shut behind me with the same quiet care I'd used to open it, walked down the front path at the same measured pace, placed the frame and the wine bottle on the passenger seat, and drove away from my son's house on an October night that felt like the last night of something I hadn't known was ending. I didn't cry. I drove 3 miles to a parking lot outside of Walgreens, cut the engine, and sat in the dark for a long time. The frame was on the seat beside me. Carol's face angled up slightly, caught in that permanent laugh, hand on the door frame of a house we'd loved. I thought about how she used to say that the house wasn't the wood and brick, but the way people moved through it, whether they moved with care or without it. I thought about how she would have wept, hearing what her son had just said about his father. Then I opened my banking app. The transfer history loaded. 36 payments, each one exactly $3,200, labeled the same way every month. Mortgage support loan. The first one from October 2 years ago, 3 months after Carol's funeral, when my son had called me from the driveway of their apartment and told me they were about to lose the financing on the house they'd been trying to buy for 18 months. He'd been emotional, and I had done what parents do, what I believed, genuinely believed, Carol would have wanted me to do. I said I'd help. I said it was temporary until he got stable. He'd thanked me and said they'd pay me back when they were on their feet. I scrolled to that email thread. Still there, the entire exchange preserved in my sent folder. My message. I'll cover the monthly until you're in a better position. This is a loan, not a gift. Consider it family financing. We can formalize it whenever you'd like. His reply. Sent 11 minutes later. Thank you, Dad. We won't forget this. We'll pay you back, I promise. $115,200. That number glowed on my screen in the Walgreens parking lot while someone walked past with a bag of late-night purchases, completely unaware that beside them, a man's understanding of his family was being completely restructured. I took a screenshot, opened my contacts, and found the name I needed. Frank Delgado answered on the third ring, which told me he was still awake and not yet asleep in front of the television. We'd been acquainted for 15 years through the Charlotte Contractors Association. He'd handled 3 property disputes for me over the years and knew how I documented things thoroughly, in writing. From the beginning, Frank, I said. I need to meet first thing tomorrow. Something has changed. He didn't ask questions. He said he'd have coffee ready by 8. Frank's office was in a restored Victorian on East Moorhead Street. The kind of building that looked like it had always been a law office, even when it was a private home. I arrived at 7:50, sat in my truck watching the leaves move on the sidewalk oaks, and reviewed the folder I'd assembled overnight. Bank statements printed and highlighted. The email chain. Screenshots of every labeled transfer. A timeline I'd typed at 2 in the morning when sleep seemed irrelevant. Frank was already in the conference room when I came in, reading glasses on, coffee made. He looked at me once and said nothing, which was how he always began when he understood something serious had occurred. I laid the documents on the table in the order I'd organized them and told him what happened. The housewarming, the toast, the words my son had said. I recounted them with the same precision I'd once used reading site surveys, factual, complete, without editorializing. Frank read through the email chain twice, then the bank statements, then the timeline. The language in the original email is helpful, he said finally. You explicitly framed this as a loan. He explicitly acknowledged repayment. The payment labels on every transfer reinforced that characterization. You've been consistent throughout. He removed his glasses. North Carolina recognizes verbal and written family loan agreements. With documentation this thorough, the intent is not ambiguous. What's the process? Formal demand letter, citing the loan agreement, the documented amount, and requesting repayment within 60 days. If they don't respond or refuse, we file in Superior Court for breach of contract. Given what you've brought me, recovery is likely. I wrote the number in the margin of my notepad. $115,200. One question, Frank said. Are you prepared for what this does to the relationship? The relationship was described at a party last night, I said. I was just late enough to hear it. He nodded once and reached for his pen. The demand letter went out by certified mail on a Thursday. Frank had drafted it with the precision of someone who understood that the goal was clarity, not provocation, a statement of facts, a documented amount, a 60-day window, his contact information at the bottom for any questions or arrangements. I spent the days that followed doing the things that constitute a life. I finished the retaining wall I'd been building in my backyard, stacking riverstone with the patience that physical work requires. I had dinner with my nephew on Friday, my brother's son, 29 years old, working in commercial lending in uptown Charlotte, the kind of young man who saw through pretense, the way people who work with numbers tend to. He'd always been close to both sides of the family, and I could tell within the first 10 minutes of dinner that he'd already heard from my son. His posture had that particular tension of someone carrying information they weren't sure how to deliver. He called you, I said. Yesterday, my nephew said. He wanted to know if you seemed okay. If you'd said anything strange lately. If you'd been confused at all. I set my fork down. What did you tell him? I told him you seemed fine, and that I wasn't going to be in the middle of whatever was happening. He paused. Grandpa, what is happening? I told him about the toast. He sat very still while I spoke. When I finished, he looked at the table for a moment, then back at me. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't. I'm sorry, Raymond. You don't need to apologize. You weren't there. I picked up my fork. But I need you to understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. This isn't about anger. This is about the fact that I loaned them a significant amount of money with a documented agreement, And what I heard that night made me understand very clearly how they view the arrangement and how they view me. My nephew sat with that for the rest of dinner. He was the kind of person who processed things fully before speaking. I respected that. Before we left, he said he'd stay in contact with both sides and that if he heard anything I should know, he'd tell me. I thanked him and meant it. My son called on a Saturday morning, 11 days after the housewarming. I let the phone ring 4 times before I answered. Each ring would register as unusual to someone who expected me to pick up immediately, and unusual was the appropriate register for what we now were to each other. "Dad," he said, "I don't understand this letter from a lawyer." "Which part is unclear?" "All of it. It says you're calling in a loan." "What loan?" "You helped us with the mortgage. That's what parents do." "I sent you an email 2 years ago," I said. "You replied to it. I'll make sure your attorney has a copy." Silence. The long kind, where a person is reassessing the ground they thought was solid. "You don't have to do this," he said. "Whatever's going on with you, we can talk about it. Come for dinner. We can sit down like family." "Everything is fine," I said. "Have your attorney contact Frank Delgado. All questions go through him." I ended the call and set the phone on the kitchen counter. Outside the window, the November light was coming in flat and clear across the backyard wall I'd just finished. River stone and mortar, level and tight. Some things you build because they need to be built. Others because the act of building itself holds you together while everything else is in motion. The calls escalated over the following week. My son, twice. My daughter-in-law, once, leaving a voicemail so measured and warm, it could have been mistaken for genuine concern if I hadn't heard her at that window. Then my son again, 3 calls in a single evening, the last one after 10 o'clock. I let them all go to voicemail. I listened to each one carefully and noted the progression. Confusion first, then bargaining, then the edge of anger, trying to disguise itself as hurt. On a Tuesday afternoon, my nephew called. "She went to your doctor," he said. My cousin told me. "She called Dr. Hartley's office and told the receptionist she was concerned about your memory. Said you'd been acting confused and making financial decisions that didn't make sense." I sat down at the kitchen table. "When?" "Last week. Apparently. I don't know what came of it, if anything. Thank you for telling me." After I hung up, I opened a new document on my computer and began a different kind of list. Left column, dates of every mortgage transfer, every email, every bank transaction. Right column, major decisions I'd made in the past 2 years that required clear, documented competency. Refinancing my own property in March. The commercial contract I'd consulted on for a builder in Rock Hill. The detailed specifications I'd submitted to the Homeowners Association for the retaining wall project. 3 conversations with my financial advisor about portfolio rebalancing, all documented in writing. 3 years of evidence assembled in an hour that could not be reconciled with cognitive decline. 2 days later, I answered the door to find a woman in her early 40s, holding a county identification badge, a tablet, and the practiced expression of someone who had learned to hold judgment until the assessment was complete. "Mr. Lawson? I'm Rebecca Chen, Adult Protective Services, Mecklenburg County. We received a call regarding your well-being. May I come in?" I stepped back and held the door open. She sat in the living room. I sat across from her. My documents were already organized on the coffee table from the night before, not because I'd known she was coming, but because I'd known someone was coming. This was a predictable move. "Mr. Lawson, can you tell me why we're here?" "My daughter-in-law reported cognitive concerns to prompt this visit," I said. "The timing coincides with a legal demand I've made for repayment of a $115,200 family loan. The goal is to have me declared incompetent, so the debt would be invalidated. That won't succeed, but I understand why they're trying it." Rebecca kept her expression neutral. Her pen moved slightly. The assessment took an hour and 40 minutes. Standard cognitive screening, backward counting, clock drawing, word recall, date orientation, spatial reasoning. I answered every question without hesitation or error. The clock I drew freehand was geometrically precise. 32 years of reading blueprints and producing detailed site drawings had given me a visual accuracy that didn't degrade with age, it refined with it. When she asked about my finances, I pulled up my investment accounts, walked her through the allocation, explained the quarterly rebalancing strategy, described the tax documentation process. I told her my passive income from the portfolio, the amount I'd paid in federal taxes the previous year, and the name and direct line of my financial advisor, if she wanted to verify. "You manage all of this yourself?" she asked. "Every transaction, every statement. I verify figures before I sign anything. My advisor handles the filings, but I review every number before it goes anywhere." She looked at her tablet, then back at me. "Mr. Lawson, I see no evidence of impairment. I'll be filing a closure on this case." After she left, I sat in the same chair for 10 minutes without moving. They had genuinely believed this would work. They looked at me, a 65-year-old man helping his son with a mortgage, and seen not a person making a deliberate choice, but a confused old man they could redirect like traffic. An obstacle to be routed around. That was what the toast meant, underneath everything. He's useful but not present, not real, not someone you have to reckon with. I picked up my phone and called Frank. "Rebecca Chen from APS came to my house this afternoon," I said. "They filed a cognitive competency complaint. Obviously it failed. But this tells us everything about the direction they're planning to take. It actually strengthens our position," Frank said. "Documents a bad faith attempt to undermine the legal proceedings. I'll note it formally." A pause. "You want me to move to the next phase?" "File," I said. "I'm done with the waiting." The 60-day window expired on a gray December afternoon. Frank sent me the case confirmation by email. Mecklenburg County Superior Court, case number 24CV08341, debt recovery action, $115,200 plus 5% annual interest. Trial set for late February, though Frank said most cases like this settled well before a judge had to say a word. My nephew stopped by 2 days later, technically, to return a set of post-hole diggers he'd borrowed in September. Actually, to tell me things I needed to know. "They're in trouble," he said. We were in the garage, him holding the post-hole diggers, me straightening the pegboard. He borrowed $8,000 from his mother's side. She took a cash advance on a credit card for $4,500. The restaurant they were going to open, that's gone. The investor pulled out when they missed 2 preliminary meetings. They were planning a restaurant? He told people that's what the house equity would fund. Once they got stable, they were going to remortgage and launch it. My nephew looked at me carefully. He said the plan was always to use the house as leverage, that your payments were basically building their startup capital. I absorbed this slowly, the way you absorb information that reconfigures what you thought you knew. The mortgage support hadn't been a bridge while he got stable. It had been, in their conception, seed money, that they'd simply never intended to name as such. "Did they ever plan to repay it?" I asked. My nephew set the post-hole diggers against the wall and didn't answer right away. Which was an answer. The first court-ordered interim payment was due January 15th. Frank had secured a judge's order requiring $2,500 monthly pending trial, based on the documented amount and the likelihood of success. The payment arrived on the 17th, 2 days late, in the exact amount. Frank had warned me this would happen, the first one scraped together through whatever combination of borrowed money and panic was available to them, because missing it would constitute contempt, and they knew it. February's payment didn't come. Not on the 1st. Not on the 10th. Not on the 15th. Frank filed the petition 3 days later to accelerate the proceedings. The missed payment triggered provisions in the court order that moved things forward faster than the original timeline. I learned from my nephew that my son had been put on a performance improvement plan at work, the kind of designation that companies use as a documented path toward termination. He'd been distracted, missed deadlines, snapped at a team member in a meeting that 3 people witnessed. The pressure of the legal situation had transferred directly into his professional life, which transferred into more financial instability, which transferred into more pressure, a self-reinforcing system. My daughter-in-law started working extended shifts at the medical billing company where she was employed. My nephew said she came home past 9 most evenings, that the house, my son's house, the house I had helped pay for over 3 years, was starting to show the signs of 2 people, Tension, for this stopped maintaining things because the future of the thing itself was uncertain. I didn't enjoy hearing any of this. I want to be clear about that. There is a difference between enforcing consequences and taking pleasure in suffering. and I had no interest in the second one. What I felt was something closer to the flat, necessary sensation of watching a process complete itself, like watching concrete cure or waiting for a load-bearing wall to be inspected. Not pleasant, not unpleasant, just what had to happen. On a Saturday morning in late January, I was in the driveway changing the oil on my truck when a car I recognized pulled to the curb. My son got out. He walked up the driveway with his hands pushed deep into the pockets of a jacket that looked like it had been slept in, unshaven eyes carrying the particular redness of someone who'd been sleeping badly for weeks. I kept working. Let him stop at the edge of the driveway. Let him be the one who began. "This has to stop," he said. His voice was tight. "You're taking everything. The house, the account, everything we've built. You have more money than you'll ever spend. Why are you doing this to us?" I set down my wrench and looked at him directly. "I'm collecting a documented loan," I said. "That's not cruelty. That's a legal process you triggered when you stopped treating the agreement as real. It was never a real loan to us. You never once said, 'Pay me back.' Not in 3 years. You just sent the money every month." "I sent you an email," I said. "You replied to it. You used the word repay." Something crossed his face. The quick internal flinch of a person remembering something they'd filed under irrelevant. That was just how people talk. You know what I meant. "You were helping us." "I was," I said. "And you were supposed to be building towards stability while I did. Instead, you were planning a restaurant on my money and mocking me at parties." He went very still. "I was there," I said quietly. "I was standing in your foyer. I heard every word of her toast. I heard what you said after. I was 23 minutes late because I stopped to have a photograph of your mother framed as a housewarming gift." The color left his face in the slow, absolute way of someone whose version of events has just been dismantled. "Dad, the photograph is still in my truck," I said. "It's been there since October." He opened his mouth and closed it again. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's dog barked twice and stopped. "You can go to the media," he said finally, his voice changing register, moving from desperation toward something harder. "You can ruin our lives with paperwork. But people will know what kind of father does this to his own son. I'll make sure of it." I reached into the breast pocket of my jacket and removed the small digital recorder I'd placed there 20 minutes earlier, when I'd recognized his car pulling onto my street. I set it on the hood of my truck, between us. "Before you consider that," I said, "you should know I've been recording since you turned into the driveway. North Carolina is a one-party consent state. I was present. Everything you've said is documented." I pressed the play button for 3 seconds, enough to confirm the audio quality, then stopped it. "I also have recordings from your housewarming. I was standing in the foyer when your wife made her toast. The audio is clear." He stared at the recorder. The transformation was immediate. The hard edge collapsed, replaced by a kind of bewilderment, as if the ground he thought he was standing on had turned out to be a paper map of the ground instead. You recorded us?" "I record things I want to remember accurately," I said. "It's a habit from 30 years of construction disputes." I picked up the recorder and put it back in my pocket. "If you'd like to go to the media, I will bring bank records, an email thread in which you explicitly promised repayment, and this audio. You're welcome to consider whether that's the story you want told." He stood in my driveway for another moment, then turned and walked back to his car. He sat there for a full minute before starting the engine. I watched him drive away, then picked up my wrench and finished the oil change. The trial was scheduled for a Tuesday. Frank met me in the lobby of the courthouse at 8:45, both of us in suits. Both of us carrying identical manila folders with exhibits tabbed and ordered. My son and daughter-in-law were already at the defendant's table when we entered, seated with an attorney. I didn't recognize a younger woman in a blue blazer who was reviewing her notes with the focused intensity of someone who understood she was working with a weak hand. Judge Patricia Holloway was in her early 60s, silver-haired, with the specific economy of movement that comes from decades of managing courtrooms full of people who believe their situation is unique. She reviewed the case summary before looking up. "This is a debt recovery action for a family loan," she said. "Plaintiff claims $115,200 plus interest. Defendants claimed the payments constituted a gift with no repayment obligation. Counsels, you may proceed. Their attorney stood first. She made a competent, earnest argument. Parental support is inherently gratuitous. The informal nature of the payments indicated gift intent. No promissory note existed. No repayment schedule was established. It was the best argument available given what she had to work with. I watched her deliver it and thought that, under different circumstances, with different facts, she might have won. Frank was methodical and unhurried. He entered the email thread as Exhibit A. Judge Holloway read my original message on the display screen. This is a loan, not a gift. Consider it family financing. And then my son's reply, we'll pay you back, I promise. Frank let the room sit with that for 10 full seconds. The defendant acknowledged repayment in writing, Your Honor, Frank said. That follows the plaintiff's explicit characterization of the payments as a loan. The bank records in Exhibits B through D show contemporaneous documentation, every transfer labeled mortgage support loan at the time it was made. This is not a retroactive reinterpretation. This is a consistent documented loan structure spanning 36 months. Judge Holloway looked at their attorney. Counselor, I'm reading your client's email. He wrote, we'll pay you back. How do you reconcile that with your gift theory? Your Honor, that language reflects gratitude, not contractual commitment. It reflects a commitment to repay, made in writing, following a message in which the plaintiff explicitly named this a loan. The judge made a note on her pad. I'm not seeing meaningful ambiguity. I watched my son throughout. He sat straight for the first hour, arms crossed, jaw set, the posture of someone who still believed the situation might resolve in his favor. When Frank displayed the labeled bank statements, he uncrossed his arms. When Judge Holloway questioned their attorney about the email, he looked at the table. When the judgment was read, he put both hands flat on the defendant's table and stared at them. The preponderance of evidence establishes a loan relationship, Judge Holloway said. The December 2022 email documentation demonstrates mutual understanding of temporary financial support with repayment obligation. Bank records confirm contemporaneous classification as a loan. The defendant's written acknowledgement of repayment intent is explicit. Judgment is entered for the plaintiff in the amount of $115,200 plus accrued interest to be satisfied within 18 months through monthly installments of $6,800 or through property sale with immediate satisfaction. The gavel came down, 95 minutes from start to finish. Frank gathered his files without ceremony. I buttoned my jacket and stood. As I walked toward the exit, I passed within arm's reach of their table. My daughter-in-law looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her expression somewhere between devastation and the particular blankness of someone who has finally stopped constructing alternative realities. I kept walking. Some things don't require acknowledgement. Outside, the February air was cold and direct. My son came through the courthouse doors 30 seconds behind me, his attorney beside him, speaking in a low, urgent voice about appellate options. He looked at me across the top step. You got what you wanted, he said. Are you satisfied? You destroyed your own family for money. I turned to face him fully. I didn't destroy anything, I said. I heard what you both think of me. I heard what she said about the man who spent 3 years helping you build something. You didn't destroy me when you said it. You just removed the part where I pretend I didn't hear it. I looked at him steadily. I'm not a resource to be managed. I'm your father. And you forgot that long before I came to that housewarming. I walked to my car. The February wind came off the Catawba corridor the way it always did in this part of Charlotte, steady and without apology. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, looking at the courthouse facade, thinking about the photograph still wrapped in its paper in my hall closet at home. Carol in the doorway, hand on the frame, laughing. I started the engine and drove home. The first court-ordered payment arrived 9 days late in March. The second didn't come at all. Frank filed for accelerated property proceedings on April 3rd. By the middle of May, with 2 missed payments and documented non-compliance, the court authorized liquidation proceedings. The house was listed by a court-appointed real estate firm on May 20th. My nephew came by on a Thursday evening as the listing went live. We sat on the back porch with coffee, and he told me what he knew. My son had been let go from his job in March, the performance improvement plan having completed its administrative purpose. He was consulting irregularly, picking up project-based work through former colleagues. My daughter-in-law had moved in with her sister temporarily. The marriage, my nephew said, was effectively over. They were still technically together, but living apart, communicating through attorneys about the property division that would follow. "Do you regret it?" my nephew asked. "Which part?" "Any of it. All of it." I looked at the retaining wall I'd built in the fall. Riverstone, level courses, the whole thing exactly where it was supposed to be. "I regret that I had to do it," I said. "I don't regret that I did." My nephew nodded slowly. He had the young man's need for clean moral accounting, for the world to resolve into clear positions, and he was learning. You could see it in the way he'd stopped trying, that it rarely did. "He's struggling, Raymond. Really struggling." "I know. Is there is there a version where this ends differently?" "There's a version where he learns something," I said. "Not from me explaining it, from living through what happens when you treat people as furniture. That's the only version that means anything." The house sold in June, a split level in a neighborhood that had appreciated since they bought it, for $392,000. After the outstanding mortgage balance, the court costs, and the full judgment amount with interest, my son received $4,200, and the knowledge that 3 years of mortgage payments had ended exactly the way the email said they would with an accounting. Frank called me on a Wednesday morning with the final distribution confirmation. The debt was satisfied. The legal process was complete. He used the word resolution in the professional sense, the sense that means all accounts are closed, and I thanked him for his work and told him I'd have a check to the office by Friday. I drove home from Frank's office through a Charlotte morning that was doing that particular thing it does in early summer, the humidity not yet oppressive, the light not yet brutal, just the city in that brief window before August arrives and settles in like a tenant who doesn't read their lease. I stopped at the frame shop on South Boulevard. The woman behind the counter recognized me. I'd been in 3 times in the past 8 months. "The oak frame you had done in October," I said. "Is that style still available?" She looked it up and confirmed it was. I thanked her and drove home to get the photograph. That evening, I brought the framed picture of Carol into the living room and set it on the mantel, between a photograph of my son at his college graduation and one of my nephew at a hiking trail in the Smokies 2 summers ago. Her hand on the door frame, her laugh, her wholehearted, total conviction that the people she loved were worth the effort. I looked at her for a long time. "I handled it," I told her, "the way I had to, not the way you would have. You'd have sat with him for hours, the 2 of you crying and working through it, and somewhere in all of that he'd have understood." I straightened the frame gently. "I don't have that gift. I have precision and documentation and a very good attorney. And I have the belief that people who are never allowed to face what they've done never stop doing it." So I let him face it. I sat in the chair that faced the mantel, the chair she'd always said was the best reading chair in the house, because the light from the east window hit it directly until noon, and I thought about what came next. 3 weeks later, I sat across from an estate attorney whose specialty was probate and trust structures. I had a typed list on the table between us. "I want to revise the existing will entirely," I said. "The charitable component should be 60%. Here's the list of organizations, all focused on elder care, isolated aging adults, financial literacy programs for seniors." I slid the list across. 25% to my nephew, unconditionally. The remaining 15% to my son, contingent on 2 conditions, met within 24 months of my passing. Completion of a certified financial literacy program, and 150 hours of documented volunteer service with any organization serving elderly populations. The attorney looked at the conditions clause carefully. "You want the conditions to be verifiable? Third-party documentation?" "Completion certificates and a verified volunteer log," I said. "Not my assessment. Documented external verification." "And if he doesn't complete both conditions within the window?" "The 15% transfers to the charitable pool." The attorney made his notes. "You're giving him a genuine opportunity." "I'm giving him a choice," I said. "Those are different things. One is about my generosity. The other is about his character. I'm interested in his character. I've spent enough on his generosity. He reviewed the full structure once more, asked 2 clarifying questions, and said he'd have a draft ready within a week. When he slid the engagement letter across the table, I signed it on the first read with a steady hand, the way I sign everything. My nephew came for dinner on a Sunday in late July. I made brisket the way Carol used to, low and slow with a dry rub she'd written on an index card that I'd kept pinned above the stove for 2 years. We ate on the back porch and talked about his work, his apartment, a woman he'd been seeing for 4 months, whom he described with the careful enthusiasm of a man trying not to jinx something. I told him about the revised will and watched his face work through surprise and then something quieter. "You left him something," my nephew said, "after everything." "He's my son," I said. "That doesn't dissolve because he forgot it for a while. Do you think he'll do the conditions?" I thought about it honestly, the way Carol always asked me to think about things. Not the answer I wanted to give, but the answer I actually believed. "I don't know," I said. "That's the point. I genuinely don't know, and whatever he chooses will tell me more about who he's become than anything I could observe directly. The choice is real. The conditions are achievable. Whether he makes them is entirely his." My nephew looked out over the retaining wall, at the yard behind it, at the neighbor's oak tree dropping early leaves onto the fence line. "You're still hoping," he said. "I'm always going to be his father," I said. "That's a condition that doesn't expire." We finished dinner as the sun moved behind the roofline and the backyard went into the particular summer shadow that made the river stone in the wall look almost blue. I cleared the plates and washed them, put them away in their proper places, dried my hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle. Then I walked back out to the porch, sat in the chair that faces the yard, and did something I hadn't done in 8 months of legal filings and strategy sessions and documented phone calls and court dates. I sat still. No phone, no laptop, no folder of exhibits, just the yard, and the wall, and the evening coming on the way it does at the end of a long day's work, slowly, without ceremony, and with the specific quality of light that exists only in the last 20 minutes before dark, when everything looks more permanent than it is. 9 months ago, I drove away from a housewarming party with a framed photograph of my dead wife on the passenger seat and $115,200 on a banking app screen. I drove away from a house I helped build with money I earned over 30 years of work, from a celebration I wasn't invited to be part of, from a version of my family that had decided I was infrastructure rather than a person. I was not the same man who'd turned around in that foyer, but I was not diminished either. If anything, I was clearer about what I would accept, about what I was owed, about the difference between love that asks nothing and love that asks for something and calls it love. I'd spent 65 years learning to build things that lasted. The retaining wall, the houses I'd contracted over 3 decades, the marriage that had lasted 38 years until cancer made it finite. Some things you build for other people, some things you build for yourself. The hardest ones are the structures you have to dismantle before you can understand what was actually holding them up. I heard a car on the street, then the neighborhood going quiet again. Somewhere 2 houses down, a screen door opened and closed. Ordinary sounds. A Tuesday evening in Charlotte, North Carolina, at the end of a summer that had cost more than most. I was financially whole. I was legally finished. I was a man who had stood in a foyer and heard the truth about how he was seen and had chosen to respond with documentation rather than silence or collapse. I was Raymond Lawson. I had built things and buried my wife and raised a son who forgot for a while what I was worth. I had collected what I was owed. I had revised my will with room for change. I had put Carol's photograph where it belonged. I was not waiting for anyone to value me. The stars appeared in 1s and 2s above the oak line, the way they always do, not all at once, but gradually, each one declaring itself. When the dark is finally ready, I sat with them for a long time, without moving, without planning, without documenting anything at all. It was enough.